Welcome back. If you're a sports fan, you know this well. If you wear, just to name an example, a Yankees jersey to Fenway Park in Boston, or wear a Boston Red Sox jersey to the Bronx, there will be consequences. At minimum, verbal abuse, maybe a 16-ounce beer you weren't planning on wearing, and sometimes worse. Well, we may have a whole new definition of worse. This story is about a San Francisco Giants fan who wore his game shirt to Dodger Stadium for opening day this year. By the end of the day, he was in a coma. A lot of people have been following his story ever since. Tonight, you will hear him speak and hear details of the attack for the first time. Dr. Nancy Snyderman reports on the game gone wrong.
It was opening day of the 2011 baseball season at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles.
He does more than pull a ground ball.
The Dodgers were playing their longtime rivals, the San Francisco Giants. 55,000 fans piled in to celebrate an all-American rite of spring. In a sea of Dodger blue, a small group of friends, Giants fans, stood out in their orange and black jerseys. One of them was Brian Stow, a paramedic and doting father. No one could imagine that trip to the ballpark would leave Brian like this, unable to walk,
reach,
barely able to talk, and a third of his brain destroyed. His close-knit family was shaken to the core. Brian's father, Dave.
What's happened to Brian is so serious and daily. Breaks your heart to think about it.
Brian's friends Corey Maciel and Jeff Bradford sat down with me for their first television interview to give their account of that night when they say they walked into the parking lot after the game and were jumped by two Dodgers fans.
That's when Brian, from behind, got punched in the side of the head, excuse me. He was punched with a haymaker in the side of the head.
where you see a haymaker.
It was a running, huge, sweeping punch.
So a sucker punch from behind.
Yeah. And first thing that hit the ground was the back of his head. And I watched his head bounce off the asphalt and heard it.
And what did you hear?
Just the crack. Just that I don't know how to, a crack or a thud, just that sound of bone hitting asphalt.
As Brian lay motionless on the ground, Corey and Jeff say the assailants kicked him in the head over and over again.
Jeff and I actually got to him right about the same time and jumped on top of him, covered him up. And, you know, I'm pleading just for these guys to stop.
There was a thug culture at Dodger Stadium.
Bill Plaschke, a columnist with the Los Angeles Times, has been covering professional sports for 3 decades.
It was just horrendously scary there, and it had gotten scarier. You couldn't look at people the wrong way at concession stand lines. You had to be careful who you cheered for. We saw it coming. You could see there was fights almost every night. It was not a surprise Brian Stow was beaten, and it was not a surprise that it was a Dodger fan beating a guy in a Giant jersey. It was not a surprise, either one of those, and that was the most horrible thing about it. And we were so angry because everyone who was there and everyone who'd ever been to Dodger Stadium saw this coming.
And as these YouTube videos show, it's no longer unusual to see fights in the stands and parking lots at baseball stadiums across the country. This fight took place 2 years ago in Dodger Stadium parking lot not far from where Brian was attacked. And on the night of Brian's beating, he clearly sensed the menacing atmosphere. He sent this text to a friend: "It's effing scary here." 2 hours later, he was in the hospital fighting for his life.
Very good. Okay, now.
When I visited Brian almost 9 months after the attack, he was able to hold a very simple conversation.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Nancy.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine.
I've heard so much about you.
How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
That's good.
You're just as handsome as your sister said you are.
I want you to move your hand across your body.
After spending 7 months in the intensive care unit, much of that time in a medically induced coma, Brian was transferred to this special rehabilitation center in San Jose, California. This day, he is able to write his name, something he couldn't do a month earlier.
Nicely done.
The beating most severely damaged the frontal lobes of Brian's brain, the area that controls decision-making, planning, and personality.
He was a little confused.
And every day, Brian's mother Ann, father Dave, and sisters Bonnie and Aaron search for traces of the old Brian.
I see you smiling. What are you thinking about?
He was fun. He was funny. He was always kidding the girls when they were growing up.
He's always had the same sense of humor since he was little. And it's quirky, but you know, it's almost infectious where everybody kind of just wants to be around him.
Now surrounded by therapists 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, Brian is working to relearn everything from brushing teeth to swallowing. He is fed through a tube and needs round-the-clock care.
But right now, we'll go in tomorrow, and he could be different than he was today. He may not be as coherent and as receptive to what we're saying to him.
So it's day by day.
Oh, day by day.
It is.
Sometimes he's looking right at me and talking to me, and then sometimes there's no eye contact, or you wonder, does he really understand what I'm telling him?
Some have said Brian's beating was an isolated incident, but Bill Plaschke says that's not the case.
It makes me so mad when people say it's just Dodger Stadium. I go to games all over the country, 50 stadiums a year from coast to coast, and it's everywhere. This violence is increasing everywhere.
In Brian's case, the police eventually arrested Luis Sanchez and Marvin Norwood, charging them with multiple counts of assault. They have pled not guilty and are now awaiting a preliminary hearing. The Stowe family is suing the Dodgers, saying they failed to ensure the safety of fans attending the game. The Dodgers have increased police presence at the park and have improved the lighting in the parking lot, but they deny the Stowe's claims that security has ever been lax, saying that the night Brian was beaten, there were 195 police on duty and 233 security personnel, including off-duty officers.
What are you hoping to obtain?
We just want Brian and his children to be taken care of. Brian's medical care now is in the millions of dollars, and it's going to be a long road.
Doctors say Brian's speech and mobility may improve, but they expect him to be permanently disabled. His family cherishes the positive moments while hoping for more.
Now we can walk into a room and his therapist will be there and say, Brian, who just walked into the room? And he'd turn and he said, my mom and dad. You know, oh my God, you know, that's awesome.
I tell you, I'm no expert, but I'm a sports fan. I go to a lot of games, and my theory is that the beer-testosterone combination makes a kind of jet fuel among people. In your specialty as a medical doctor, I'm tempted to ask you, when will it all come back? What will come back? But then covering Gabby Giffords, we learned no 2 injuries.
Well, if you look at Gabby Giffords as sort of the best scenario where it was a clear trajectory, Brian's got a very different case where it's going to be a much longer strike. But I think you touched on something. Half-price beer, lax security, people looking the other way, a thug culture. The reality is, whether Brian wants to be sort of the new face of this, we have to be serious about this. Major League Baseball does not require keeping up with tabs about isolated incidents, so the numbers are really quite squishy. But I've heard this word epidemic a lot. It is time to get serious about this nonsense in the stands.
And also, I'm glad we had the sports writer to say, you know, he gets angry when he hears it's just Dodger Stadium, because I'm here to tell you it is
That's right.
not.
It's everywhere. And this family wants him to be taken care of. It's not a family looking for vengeance. It's a family that wants to tell this story and set things right.
Thanks, Doc. Look forward to your
You bet,
next story.
Brian.
Thanks for visiting us.